helpful, useful to me at least, because I find out what other people want to talk about. And so I'd like to try to leave a whole lot of time for that, after I make a few remarks here, so I can discern what it is that is on your mind, and we can have a bit of an interactive discussion. I mean, there are limitations to this kind of, distance kind of, technology, but one of the advantages is that we can actually talk to one another. And so I'd like to make sure that we have time to do that. I'm attempting for the first time to incorporate a PowerPoint presentation within this, Zoom technology, and we'll see how that goes. I've got Cindy here as my tech advisor, so in case I, really mess up, she can help me. And there's not that many slides anyway, so, but it's just, I've gotten kind of addicted to PowerPoint actually, because I think it helps me focus on what it is I wanted to say, and it also gives people something to look at besides my face, which is, I think, probably good. So the topic for the talk today is mindfulness in context. And one of the reasons I chose that topic is because it seems like it may be relevant. Mindfulness is playing out now, culturally in the same kind of way that yoga has been playing out for several decades now. And it's kind of in the same position culturally as yoga was 10 or 20, 30 years ago. I remember I gave a talk 20 years ago or something like that on yoga. I mean, I've given lots of talks on yoga, but I remember one that was based on the fact that, this must have been at least 20 years ago, that yoga had made the cover of Time magazine. Big cover story on yoga. Everyone's doing yoga, and they had like some, beautiful yoga babe, in some exotic location on the cover, doing her asana practice. And so it's kind of an indication of how mainstream a phenomenon is, does it appear on Time magazine? So on the cover of Time magazine. So here I go, trying to do my PowerPoint presentation. Share, there. You see that?
You can't hear them.
I can't hear them? Well, just nod your heads if you can see that.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, there it is. On the cover of Time magazine, The Mindful Revolution, the science of finding focus in a stressed out, multitasking culture. So, next slide, I'll just show you what they say about it in summary. This is from 2014, so not too long ago. Mindfulness is gaining acceptance with those who might otherwise dismiss mental training techniques closely tied to meditation. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Fortune 500 titans, Pentagon chiefs, and more. If distraction is the preeminent condition of our age, and there's a good case to be made for that. If distraction is the preeminent condition of our age, then mindfulness in the eyes of its enthusiasts is the most logical response. Its strength lies in its universality. Though meditation is considered an essential means to achieving mindfulness, the ultimate goal is simply to give your attention fully to what you're doing. One can work mindfully, parent mindfully, learn mindfully. One can exercise and even eat mindfully. The banking giant Chase now advises customers on how to spend mindfully. So there you have it. Now, Cindy, I got to figure out how to close this up. Oh, I think I got it. New share? No. Stop share. Okay. Yeah. So now you're seeing my face again, right? Okay, good. So, just a little bit of indication on, like I said, how mainstream mindfulness has become. I mean, mindfulness is introduced now into schools, into businesses, into the military, and so forth. I remember a time, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, when we were in Singapore, and I have a friend and student there, several of them actually, who are in high finance. And this particular friend brought me in to speak to the sort of executives of a big international bank in preparation for a whole course that they were going to introduce to those executives on mindfulness. And I told them, look, I'll tell you how to be mindful. You don't have to pay me anything. It's not that hard. It doesn't have to be some big complicated, procedure. All it means is to pay attention to what's going on in the here and now, period, full stop. That's what kind of simple mindfulness really means, the essence of mindfulness. And so, it's not a complicated thing. The topic I want to address here is in what context is mindfulness taught and practiced? In what context? So now back to my PowerPoint. This might be even not worth it. Let's see. Share. Yeah, next. So here's what, a couple of possibilities for mindfulness in context. There's a distinction between the original ancient Indian and Southeast Asian context of mindfulness, or sati in Pali, smriti in Sanskrit, versus the modern and Western context. And, anytime we introduce, something from the past, we're going to be putting it into a different context, obviously, right? We're putting it into our modern and Western context. That's unavoidable. The original and ancient Indian and Southeast Asian context is, at best known only by historians of religion, and probably certainly imperfectly. And so, that's not the main thing of interest for me, is the, kind of reapplication of a Asian and ancient concept and practice into modern and Western, culture. What's interesting to me is within modern and Western, the modern and Western context, the difference between a secularized and a spiritual context within which mindfulness is taught and practiced. And so, the Time magazine article was really about the secularized application of mindfulness in secularized contexts. And the thesis that I'll be exploring is that when you extract mindfulness from its original spiritual context, that a great deal is lost. And so, just like with yoga, when you extract the asana practice of yoga from the 8-limb original, spiritual context of yogic practice, which includes which includes ethics, which includes meditation, etc. Then you're just left with with a very, very limited a practice with very limited value. And I think you could say the same thing about mindfulness. So yeah. Huh? You want to do this?
I can do it, yes.
So, as probably many of you know, the real sort of granddaddy of secularized mindfulness is a guy named John Kabat-Zinn, who is a Harvard professor, and I think in the 1970s, late 1970s, started a program called mindfulness-based stress reduction, which tells you a lot about the purpose of secularized mindfulness, to reduce stress. Apparently, there are well over 1,000 mindfulness-based stress reduction instructors working worldwide. I don't know that much about the program, but I do know that it's very, very popular. And his institution, this program, is described as, quote, a vehicle for embodying and transmitting the Dharma in a wholly secular and universal idiom, which is an interesting kind of approach, and one that is obviously has its appeal. As I've written in books, a whole lot of people in modern culture don't want to identify with any kind of spiritual tradition, with any kind of religion. And at the same time, they want to, glean some of the benefits of a spiritual practice without, kind of buying into the whole hog. So we'll start with, can you do this? Yeah. We'll start with the definition. Next slide. Yeah. This is the definition of mindfulness according to John Kabat-Zinn, secularized mindfulness. Mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, which the particular way is then kind of described on purpose. So you're doing it intentionally in the present moment. I don't know what other mindfulness there could be except for in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And I put the italics on that. Non-judgmentally. And so that, I think, that phrase is the key to both the description of secularized mindfulness and its limitations, and its difference from mindfulness as practiced within a complete spiritual tradition. So, you can take that off now. Just like doing a little bit of internet, research for the talk, there's been a lot of claims for the benefits of secularized mindfulness, ranging from physical benefits. There's a claim that it helps your with physical pain and boosts your immune system and so forth. And many, many more claim that it helps cope with anxiety, with depression, and especially with stress. And that it boosts productivity by helping to alleviate the tendency towards multitasking, the sort of attention deficit disorder that kind of has infiltrated pretty much all of our lives, the inability to concentrate on any one thing. So that said, there are other studies that show that secularized mindfulness has very limited benefits. There's an article published this year in Psychology Today in the April edition, 2018, that reviews studies of secularized mindfulness. So it's sort of an overview of other studies, and concludes that mindfulness was only moderately effective in reducing symptoms of anxiety, depression, and pain. Mindfulness also yielded some small improvements in reducing stress and improving quality of life. And there was no evidence that mindfulness helped to improve attention, mood, eating habits, sleep, weight control, or substance abuse. So just from the sort of outset here, any kind of mindfulness is better than no mindfulness at all. Okay, so we can all agree on that, right? I mean, mindlessness is not is the sort of kind of sort of base position that we all come into life in with, and it's much better to live a conscious mindful life than a unconscious mindless life, no question about that. Okay, that said, why if we agree, if we can just sort of assume that these studies on the limitations of secularized mindfulness are true, why would that be? Why would the benefits be so limited on the benefits of secularized mindfulness be so limited? So I have an idea about that, and it comes to, it comes to the same sort of idea as to the limitations of the benefits of yoga if it's only an asana practice. You see, if you extract this one element, one component from a total spiritual kind of exercise, discipline, then the benefits will automatically be limited. The purpose of mindfulness in its spiritual context, both in the original Asian context and in a modern spiritualized context, the purpose of mindfulness, it is not stress reduction. That's not the purpose. The purpose is not, certainly not, to help you focus better on your job, on your profession, so that you're more productive. You see, the problem and the limitations of secularized mindfulness is that it treats only the symptoms. It doesn't really cure the causes. And so the difference is that in a spiritualized context, mindfulness is a tool of an endeavor to uncover the causes of stress, anxiety, and all forms of suffering, in fact. So one example of what I mean by sort of mindfulness in a spiritual context is in the very well-known Buddhist Eightfold Path, where the word that we now translate as mindfulness, smriti, appears as the seventh of the eight folds of the Eightfold Path. So you can see, it's contextualized within a more or less comprehensive spiritual discipline program. Right view, right understanding of the world, right intention, sankalpa, right speech, watching what you say, right action, watching what you do, and right livelihood. And the right here, samyak, means, skillful, ethical, beneficial. So you recall, and I'll, come back to it several times, that, in the secularized definition of mindfulness, there's an emphasis on non-judgment. But you can see clearly here, there's a judgment going on, right? What's right? What's right speech? What's right intention? And what's wrong? Right effort, right memory or mindfulness. So smriti, as I'll discuss in just a minute, smriti really, which is the word that has been translated as mindfulness, it really means memory or recollection, which is kind of interesting. And we'll come back to it. And then right concentration, samadhi. So just an example, of, how what we call mindfulness fits in, traditionally, and even at present, into a larger spiritual context, which always involves judgment, So you could say that within a spiritual context, mindfulness, or another translation that's sometimes used, is awareness, mere awareness, being aware of what's happening in the here and now, paying attention, in other words, is a first step only. It's the sort of beginning, you could say, of a spiritual practice, of just paying attention. What's happening? What's going on in my mind? What's going on in my body? What's going on around me? And but it's only a first step, and the extraction and limitations of a first step will have limited value without continuing on into the next steps of a comprehensive spiritual program that includes mindfulness. So let's take a moment to look at the Sanskrit term for mindfulness, which is smriti. In smriti in Pali is sati. It's the same word. Smriti and sati, the same word in two different languages and connected. And smriti, according to the standard Sanskrit English dictionary, has no connotation of mindfulness at all, actually. Now, the standard Sanskrit English dictionary that everyone still uses, as far as I know, I'm kind of out of the loop on these kinds of things these days, but as far as I know, it's still used. Monier Williams was written in 1899. So there's been some progress, you could say, some changes over the course of over 100 years. But nevertheless, when you look at the dictionary, what the dictionary says when it comes to smriti is remembrance, reminiscence, thinking of or upon, calling to mind or memory. So how did we get from those kind of connotations for this Sanskrit and Pali words to mindfulness? And it appears that you can trace the introduction of the English translation as mindfulness of smriti and sati to a British magistrate actually, who was kind of in charge of trying to deal with Buddhist law in Ceylon, who was also a very accomplished scholar of Pali. His name was Thomas Rhys Williams. Rhys Davids. And so perhaps as early as the late 19th century, he proposed mindfulness as a translation for sati, smriti. But it wasn't for another 100 years before that translation became really popular, became standardized, you could say. And that people attribute to John Kabat-Zinn, who wanted to who wanted to sort of understand sati as being mindful, So it's interesting to think about how the same Sanskrit word, Pali and Sanskrit word, could have two apparently different connotations in English. Because, memory does not seem to be related to mindfulness, right? When we're engaged in memory, we're not paying attention to what's going on in the here and now. It doesn't seem, right? So how do we reconcile these two possible English translations of the same Sanskrit word? Mindfulness and memory. So just a little excursion into into the importance of memory in Indian-based religions. There are two very similar Sanskrit words, similar in meaning, that are often found in philosophical texts of both Hinduism and Buddhism: samskara and vasana. And you see they have, overlapping meanings, and sometimes are just used interchangeably. Mental formations, conditioning factors, volitional activities, or karmic imprints for samskara, past impressions, habitual tendencies, karmic imprints for vasana. What this means, this is an attempt to describe, partly how karma works, is that we make mental imprints, habits, you could say, formations in our minds every time we say, do, or think something. And those imprints or memories, you could say, then help to determine how we experience things in the future. So to just go into it a little bit, what we are experiencing in the present, physically and mentally, is not what's actually happening. What we are experiencing is what we think is happening on the basis of our mental imprints from the past. And that, I think, you could say, is true both intellectually and emotionally. Intellectually, when we encounter an object or another person or whatever, we immediately, in order to make it comprehensible, we immediately overlay categories, classifications that we have derived from the past, that we have inherited from our own karmic past. And that includes cultural, of course, too. Our culture tells us, oh, that's a tree. We learn this, early on, as children growing up. We get the categories, we get the names for things. And then, so when we encounter events or objects in the ever-changing and always new present, we simply overlay something we already know and has already happened onto it. So we're not really perceiving what's happening. We're perceiving our images of what's happening. Now, emotionally, you could say the same kind of thing. When we encounter, let's say, an irritating person, we are irritated by the irritating person because we've had similar experiences in the past where we got irritated. And so we just say to when we encounter the irritating person, oh, this is an irritating person, just like the other irritating people that have been in my life. And we respond just like we have in the past. Karma is habits. It's just doing the same things over and over again, thinking the same things over and over again, and so forth. I had an ex-wife who would say to me, "You're just like my dad." And she didn't like her dad. So that was the way, to categorize me. Just like I was like, I'm me. I'm not your dad. I'm me, myself. But, this is what we all do. We are constantly reapplying. We are constantly applying our memories to the ongoing present. And so that's why memory is kind of important. And, in the Indian tradition, and the purpose, you could say, of a spiritual discipline is to plant new memories. To break out of the cycle of suffering that comes from, our negative memories, and to replace them with positive ones, and to do that over and over and over again. So, every time we do something, we're making a mental imprint. Every time we say something or think something, we're making a new mental imprint for the future. So what kind of mental imprints are we making? Are they the same old, negative ones? Or because of a spiritual training, can we systematically begin to replace memories, to create new memories, in other words, for the future? And then that will have a profound effect, according to this whole kind of system of thought, on how we experience and react to the world in the future. So that's a little bit of memory in the Indian tradition. I wanted to also point out, next one please, that according to my old teacher from way back in graduate school, that memory is crucial to the religious life as a whole. This was Mircea Eliade's, kind of one of his fundamental insights into religion, generally speaking, in the history of humankind. The whole religious life is a commemoration, a remembering. The true sin is forgetting. And you can see this in all kinds of dimensions in religion. The ritual, for example, is a commemoration, is a remembering of an act that has been done before. Myth and sacred stories in general are told over and over and over again to remember, try to remember. So all of this is important. You can take down the slide, I think, now. When it comes to understanding the importance of memory. So for the remainder of the talk, I'd just like to, kind of go through maybe twice something of a sequence of how memory/mindfulness works within a spiritual context, to sort of, kind of differentiate it from the, mere awareness of mindfulness, without judgment in the present. One of our friends, Miles and Neil, in an interview, 8 years ago now, called it Mick mindfulness. Simple, secularized mindfulness is Mick mindfulness. And, just like McDonald's, it appeases your hunger, but it may not be that nourishing, if you know what I mean. So here's one go round on the sequence in a spiritual discipline, in a spiritual context, and where mindfulness fits in. We all start, in the untrained, state. We start from a state of mindlessness, really, of really just being the puppets of our own past karma. The sort of unwilling, you could say, let alone unthinking, responders to whatever it is that our past, our memories, kind of throw up to us, So we in an untrained mind, in an unconscious mind, we are simply, kind of reacting unthinkingly to events, other people, to what's going on, in our bodies and minds. Okay, that's the base, and that's the same, of course, for secularized mindfulness too. That's the base. So then, so you could say that we begin with no recollection. If mindful smriti can also mean memory or recollection, well, we begin with no conscious recollection and only unconscious memories, pulling our strings as we go through life. The beginning of a spiritual practice of mindfulness is the same as the beginning and also the end of a secularized mindfulness practice, which is remembering to pay attention. Okay, if you wanted to try to combine the two English translations of the same smriti, remembering to pay attention to what's going on in the here and now. You could call this mere mindfulness. Okay, and then we part ways. The spiritual practice of mindfulness then, kind of peels off from the secular one, because it's the mere awareness of what's going on here and now is then subject to judgment. Well, is what's going on now in my mind, good or bad? Is it beneficial or detrimental to my own happiness and to the happiness of the people around me? So, the imposition of judgment, of evaluation. And then you could say the next step, and now we're purely in the spiritual practice of mindfulness. The next step is the application of what one's learned, the remembering what one's learned in one's spiritual training, especially ethics, especially, how to try to be a good person in life, not lying, not stealing, not hurting others, not sleeping with people you shouldn't sleep with, etc. And so then the application of the memory of what one has learned about ethics, about wisdom, and about compassion kicks in. And then you say, well, what's going on? Is what's going on in my mind and body at this present moment? Something I want to, celebrate and empower? Or is it something I want to change? And if it's and so, in many, many cases, maybe, especially on the early stages of the path, almost all cases, one says, no, I want to change this. This is not beneficial to my own happiness and to the happiness of the people around me. This thought, this feeling, this action. So then one tries to create a new response, a new habit. And mindfully, remembering what one has learned, mindfully reapply, antidotes to negative thoughts, feelings, and actions. And then you could say, just repeat that over and over and over again. Repeat that kind of process. Being aware, being mindful of what's going on, judging it, evaluating it, seeing is this something, is this a feeling, a thought, an action I want to, I want to repeat, or is it something I want to try to change over and over and over and over again until it becomes second nature, you could say, like second nature. It becomes instinctual. In other words, the beneficial thoughts, the beneficial feelings, the beneficial actions of physical body becomes so ingrained, so habit formed that you don't have to think about it anymore. And then, we're at the beginning of you could say the beginning of the end of mindfulness. One becomes, again, sort of mindless in that one has trained oneself through mindfulness over and over and over again, and through the new habit forming activity, spiritual activity, one has trained oneself to trust oneself and to then not be overly self-conscious about one's mindfulness. You can start dropping mindfulness. Something we might want to talk about, I didn't want to go into it too heavily here, is one of the reasons it seems that the secularized version of mindfulness is so popular is that it appeals to a culture of narcissism. It appeals to a culture of, self-absorption that we are certainly living in, the selfie culture. And, when somebody tells you, well, just pay attention to what's going on in your mind, it's like, well, yes, I'll pay attention to me. I've already been doing that in all kinds of ways. Now I've got a discipline of paying attention to me, instead of like thinking of, well, that's just the first step in the process of learning how to pay attention to others and to life around you, instead of just what's going on in your own, psychophysical, little atomistic structure there. Then, so that's kind of one go around on it. So now maybe we'll go through it again, maybe a slightly, this sequence with a slightly, more depth, and then talk at the very end here about the ultimate goal of all spiritual traditions, which is variously described as freedom or liberation, salvation, nirvana, enlightenment. Liberation from what? What are we striving to be liberated from? And just to give you a clue, I think one of the ways to approach that question, an answer to that question, we are trying to be liberated from our memories. We are trying to be liberated from the past, in order to encounter the newness of every moment with an unmediated mind, immediate encountering of the third kind, close encounters of the third kind, instead of encounters filtered through memory and karma. That, I think, is one way of understanding what liberation is. All right, so let's go back. Step one, mere awareness. So in the original Asian spiritual context of mindfulness, there is a kind of a statement of the importance of mere awareness. the question is mere awareness of what, and is it mere? You know what I mean? So the foundational text for all forms of, modern understandings of mindfulness, spiritual and secular, is something called the Maha Sati Patana Sutta. Sutta is the Pali version. This is a Pali text for sutra. Maha means great. Sati means smriti, means memory. And patana is usually translated as pillar or foundation. But in the dictionary, it also has the connotation in the Pali of starting point. So the four starting points of mindfulness, okay? So it's the beginning. And look what it says. What are you supposed to be mindful of? First, one who is watching the body stays focused on the body with fierce intensity, awareness, and recollection, sati, detaching from worldly longing and repugnance. So watching your body. One who is feeling, what's my body doing? What's the position it's in? This is also, the basis of breath, focusing on your breath, mindfully focusing on your breath. It's a physical thing. One who is watching the feelings, Vedana, stays focused on the feelings with fierce intensity, awareness, and recollection, detaching from worldly longing and repugnance. One who is watching the state of mind. Here it means the kind of, like when you wake up in the morning, you wake up with a certain kind of state of mind, right? This is going to be a good day, or, I'm feeling a little, I have bad dreams, or, whatever it is, right? Just a general state of mind. One who is watching this state of mind stays focused on the state of mind with fierce intensity and so forth. And one who is watching thoughts, these are particular, thoughts that arise within a state of mind, you could say. Dhammas in the Pali. One who is watching thoughts stays focused on thoughts with fierce intensity, etc. So here in this, ancient and Asian text, which is also, the foundation for all understandings of mindfulness, you'll notice, at least all spiritual understandings of mindfulness, you'll notice that it is not non-judgmental. Remember Cabot-Lodge's Cabot-Zinn's definition, of mindfulness as being, not judging what's happening in the present. And here you're judging it all right. Number one, you're trying to observe the workings of the body, feeling, state of mind, and thoughts, detaching from worldly longing and repugnance. So worldly longing and repugnance means desire and aversion, which are two of the main mental afflictions that infect our minds. So detaching from the mental afflictions, and detachment itself implies a certain kind of wisdom, a certain kind of understanding of the self that is engaged in mindfulness. The self is a kind of an illusion, and to detach from the attachment that we ordinarily feel towards our body, our feelings, our state of mind, and our thoughts is also the application of a judgment and of a discipline. Okay, so this is the beginning of the difference between a secularized understanding of mindfulness and a spiritual one. To understand, to evaluate that almost everything, or for the perfectly untrained person, everything that occurs in one's psychophysical, being is shot through and infected by what we call the mental afflictions, kleshas. Desire, aversion, pride, envy, jealousy, ignorance, every one of our, ordinarily, every one of the things that we can be mindful of that are going on in our mind and body are afflicted, mentally afflicted, are the result of and cause for suffering. Yeah. So the first step is to judge what one's aware of, to judge it and to say, well, is this the kind of feeling I want to have here? Is this the kind of thought that I want to reinforce? Or is it something that I want to change? So one evaluates from the ethical point of view. Is this action, feeling, state of mind beneficial to myself and others, or is it detrimental to my own happiness and the well-being of others? Let me take this down. So a spiritual practitioner practicing mindfulness within a larger spiritual context, remembers the ethical framework, especially the ethical framework that every spiritual discipline, requires, is probably, definitive of a spiritual discipline. Some kind of understanding of what they call karma in the Eastern traditions is universal. What goes around comes around. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so is this thought, is this feeling, is this action something that I would want other people to think, feel, and do to me? That's the evaluation. Judgmental. It's judgmental, not non-judgmental. Okay? So the next step is to, apply what one remembers, what one recollects about one's ethical training, to remember one's intention. In Sanskrit, it's called sankalpa. So, this is one of the terms that describes, kind of the compass of our whole lives. What kind of a person do I want to be? What's my intention in life? What's my hopes for, for who I want to be in life? So you remember, as a spiritual practitioner, well, my intention is to try to be a better person, to try to be a good person, to try to be part of the solution instead of the problem in life. And then you observe what's going on in your mind and body, and you say, well, is this physical or mental or emotional thing that I'm observing, does it reinforce my positive intentions, my positive intention about life, or does it undercut them? And if it reinforces it, you celebrate it. You say, yes, well, geez, at least I've had one good thought today, at least I had one compassionate feeling today. That's good, better than nothing. But, if one evaluates and sees, well, this is a negative one. This is one that's driven by the mental afflictions, infected by the mental afflictions. Then one says, well, what can I do about that? This is where the secular version of mindfulness really falls on its feet. You observe these oftentimes negative feelings or thoughts or state of mind. One observes them, but then, well, what do you do about them? You see, that's why the benefit is limited, because it's just purely observational. It's not proactive in changing them, in trying to change them. So a spiritual practitioner has, because of the discipline, over the course of, many years probably, has learned to recollect, to remember, smriti, sati, to remember, to apply an ethical, framework to what's going on in one's mind and body. One learns also to apply a certain kind of wisdom, of understanding, well, why am I having this kind of feeling or thought in reaction to experience that I'm having now? Why? Where did it come from? And then, you start investigating, karma, the understanding of karma, which, by the way, after literally decades of thoughts and getting teachings and contemplation and meditation, I've come to the conclusion that no one can figure out how karma works. The exact workings of karma are unknowable. But on the other hand, it is certain that karma does work. Okay? So you can't figure out how it works. But if you don't think that it works, then you are left without any ethical foundation in your life. Without any ethical foundation. You know, if you do something good, it may or may not pay off. If you do something bad, you may or may not, suffer from it. So there has to be some kind of faith, I think it's kind of down to. Faith that, the karma's for real. And that there's a reason why all authentic spiritual traditions have embraced in one form or another something that, you might call karma in the Eastern traditions. All right? So you exercise a little bit of wisdom about where it comes from, and you exercise wisdom as to who it is happening to. Who is the self that is observing one's body, mind, and feelings and so forth? And that is the, kind of precondition for the detachment of what's going on. The detachment from the attachment to our mentally afflicted feelings, thoughts, and so forth that we have and that defines us as a self. The attachment to the feeling is what we call ourselves. I am angry. I am jealous. I am envious, and so forth. So the application of wisdom also means to separate the mental affliction or the mentally afflicted thought or feeling from the so-called I that is observing it and experiencing it. So then, the next step is just repeat over and over and over and over again to recollect, to remember, to replace old habits with new ones over and over and over again. And that's pretty much what we do for the rest of our lives as spiritual practitioners. That's pretty much the whole of a spiritual practice, is remembering what we've been taught, remembering that when we encounter an irritating person that someone told us, well, the only way you could have an irritating person is if you had been irritating to someone in the past. So if you don't want an irritating person in the future, don't be irritating back to the irritating person. You remember the fact that there cannot be an irritating person until and unless you are irritated, that things exist interdependently. You remember these things. So you don't want to have an irritating person in your life? Don't be irritated. Presto changeo. Instantly, you have just disappeared an irritating person. If you're not irritated, they cannot be irritating. Is that true? Then shake your head if you think it's true. Raise your hand and say amen if you think that's true. Now all we have to do is, okay, good, yeah. So now all we have to do is remember that. As we go through life, we have to remember these things, recollect. So then the penultimate goal, I think, of a spiritual life is to have that recollection and that revised habits become so ingrained that one doesn't have to recollect anymore. That one just instinctually, because of habit, because of training, one instinctually, when one evaluates what's going on in your mind and body and the world around you and with other people and so forth, instinctually does the right thing. You've matched your mind to the Dharma. You've matched your mind to an ethical way of life and a wisdom way of life and a compassionate way of life. And it seems to me that you know, in Mahayana Buddhism, there's a great deal of talk about bodhicitta, the chitta, the mindset of enlightenment. And when one has that mindset, one's a bodhisattva. It seems to me that that only becomes a possibility when mindfulness in the spiritual context has really been perfected, so that one doesn't have to be mindful anymore. You can like drop the practice. Just like the Buddha said, you can drop the whole of a spiritual practice, which is like a raft, he said, right? When you get to the other side of the water, you don't need the raft anymore. When you get to the at least penultimate purpose of mindfulness, of paying attention to what's going on with you, when you get to the penultimate purpose of that, which is to retrain yourself so thoroughly that your habitual instinctual response is the correct one, is the dharmically correct one, then you could drop mindfulness and pay attention to what's going on with others and not yourself, you see? To be mindful of your environment, to be mindful of the people in your environment, what's going on in your environment, what's happening in the here and now, not to you, but around you. You see what I mean? So it's a different understanding, or you could say a recontextualization of mindfulness as mindfulness of experience of the world, of the world outside of you, instead of mindfulness of what's going on within you. And that's, I think, bodhicitta. That's one understanding of what bodhicitta means in the Mahayana text. And then the observation, the mere awareness, is the mere awareness that everything in life, every experience, every event, every other person is just a field of possibility of merit, a field in which you, the newly born bodhisattva, can accrue merit by not thinking about yourself and what's going on with you, but thinking about what's happening around you and to others. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the spiritual context of mindfulness. I just wanted to end with some brief remarks about the ultimate goal of a spiritual tradition. So I talked about the penultimate goal. Yeah, next one, I think. Did I miss one? All right. So this is from the Yoga Sutra. The phrase purification of memory, smriti parishuddha, is an interesting one. When memory is purified, a non-conceptual state of mind appears, which is empty of having any self-nature and which focuses on only itself as the object of thought. So this is kind of where we're heading when it comes to smriti. What the Yoga Sutra here calls the purification of memory. And I think you can take that in two ways. It means that the vasanas or sanskaras, the mental imprints, have been purified to such an extent that one's ongoing consciousness is also purified. Because our ongoing consciousness is ordinary consciousness is sort of the same thing as our memories. We are seeing, experiencing the categories and classifications that we have established for ourselves in the past, or you could say habits, mental, physical, and emotional habits. We're experiencing the fruits of those in the present. So when memory is purified, the present's purified too. Present consciousness is purified. You can see it that way. You could also see it in a kind of a more radical way, as if not the goal, at least the sort of penultimate stages leading up to the goal. So what is the goal? Like I said before, the ultimate purpose of mindfulness or memory or all practices within a spiritual, you can take that down now, spiritual context is liberation, it's freedom. So nirvana, enlightenment, salvation, there's any number of words for I think pretty much what everyone agrees is the same state. So in the text, there are a few places where they do talk in numerous places about what we're trying to liberate ourselves from. And one of the most common, kind of understandings of liberation is liberation from suffering. And so then, we have to, if we're going to understand what that really means, we have to distinguish between suffering and pain. Because as long as we have a physical body, at least, we will experience pain, discomfort. The older you get, the more you know that's true. Isn't that right? Is there anybody else getting older here? As long as you got a physical body, you're going to experience pain. Does that have to be suffering? And you could say no. I was once giving a talk at a yoga studio in the middle of nowhere in rural Australia to, a friend had invited us to it, and she had this, really interesting, committed group of students there locally. And there was a very elderly lady who was one of those students, maybe in her 80s or something. And I was just going through the Four Noble Truths, life is suffering. And then the sort of expansion of that, number one is life is suffering. He said, birth is suffering, sickness is suffering, old age is suffering. And she says, no, it's not. Like, just interrupts us. No, it's not. Old age is not suffering. And, that was cool. To be able to experience old age as not suffering is a really, really amazing thing. To be able to experience birth, not as like some horrible, painful, bloody, traumatic thing, but as some kind of miracle that occurs, you see. To experience sickness as an opportunity to, reflect on the, impermanence of health is a very, very advantageous thing. And death too. Death does not have to be suffering. It's only suffering if you think you're going to live forever. If you thought that, well, then you're going to suffer because death is for real and inevitable. So, liberation from suffering. But another kind of approach to what we're liberated from, you can find in texts like Nagarjuna's masterwork. Where he defines liberation, next one, freedom, comes from the destruction of karma and mental afflictions. Karma and klesha. Karma and mental afflictions come from conceptual thought. And conceptual thought, karma itself, you can really understand as memory. Karma is habit and memory. And conceptual thought is also memory. We have the concepts that we have because we've had them before. So concepts, and they're labels. Conceptual thought means labeling. So karma and the mental afflictions come from conceptual thought. Mental afflictions are just labels. They're labels on the free-flowing, ongoing, changing nature of consciousness. And then we sort of freeze frame that, some part of that flow and say, I'm angry. This is anger. This is jealousy, you see? And so karma and mental afflictions come from conceptual thought, from the projection of them, from the projection of our concepts onto the ongoing experience. And projection comes to an end in emptiness. So this is, it seems to me, a description of where we're heading. We're heading ultimately to a state of mind that is non-conceptual, a non-conceptual state of mind, which means also the possibility of direct, unmediated experience of life as it unfolds on a moment-to-moment basis, without the imposition of memory on top of that. So just one more slide, and then maybe we can have a little chat. This is from Krishnamurti. We look at each experience through past memories, which is what I've been saying, right? And therefore, we never meet the new as the new, but always through the screen of the old. Therefore, it is clear that our response to experience is conditioned. Conditioned by what? Karma and klesha. Karma and mental affliction. Always limited. So this is kind of a negative way of talking about the goal. This is our, this is the problem. This is the fact. This is ultimately the problem of ignorance. We see the world as we are, not as it is. And the goal, ultimate goal of, I would argue, pretty much all the spiritual traditions, but especially the Eastern ones, is to achieve the state of mind where one at least has a detached understanding of the conceptual mind that is unfolding on a moment-to-moment basis, and probably more than that, to learn to forget concepts in order to have this direct, unmediated, non-conceptual encounter with the world around us. So, we're kind of back to non-judgment. I was like criticizing the, non-judgment element of secularized mindfulness, throughout the whole talk. But, I think where we end up is a kind of, after, years, if not lifetimes of spiritual training, we end up with the goal of non-judgment, of experiencing life as it's unfolding around us without conceptualizing it, judging it, evaluating it, and so forth. That's the ultimate goal. But on the way to that ultimate goal, there's lots of judgments and evaluations, to engage in. And that's what I was talking about in the sequence that mindfulness goes, within which mindfulness is practiced in a spiritual context. So that's enough for me, at least for now. I'd like to really find out what you guys are thinking about and discuss what you want to discuss for a little bit. Is this possible to turn the mic on there, Dima, so I can hear people?
There you are.
Spacey. So please, feel free to make comments or ask questions or about this topic or anything else if you want, for that matter. I'd just be happy to talk to somebody. Besides myself.
My own face.
I have a couple questions. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can't really hear, Dima.
Can you hear me now?
Is the mic up here?
I think they
Up here? If you could hear us earlier. I don't think you can hear me. Can you?
No, that's it. That's it. That's okay.
Oh, now you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, but we can't hear him anymore.
It's okay.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand what you're saying about, the process of mindfulness. And it sounds like what you're talking about is, as we're having these experiences and as we're aware of our reactions to things, we want to, judge whether or not the reaction is an ethical one, a helpful one, a beneficial one or not. And if it's not beneficial or helpful, to also identify what is the karmic imprint that is making me experience this in a non-beneficial way. Am I with you so far? Okay.
Yeah.
And then once we we go through that process, then it sounds like the next step is to swap out that non-beneficial way of experiencing it with a more ethical or beneficial way of experiencing that. And I'm wondering your recommendations on how to swap. Like, is that too broad of a question?
No, it's a very apt question. Let me back up and say something, in related to what you were talking about. I think that you could say that memory, karma, determines both perception and reaction. We perceive another person as, irritating, right? I mean, it's not like, in the moment, especially, you can't just like close your eyes and wish them away, like pretend that you don't find them irritating somehow. So then the perception is determined in a very real way, but our response to the perception is theoretically in our hands. I mean, it too is the product of previous habit. But, in the moment, when we encounter, say, an irritating person, although we can't not perceive them as irritating, at least in the moment, we can respond or choose to respond and react to them in a way that will help create new habits for the future that eventually will result in not even perceiving an irritating person as irritating. You see what I mean? So you could say the whole of the spiritual life is just creating new habits of thought, new habits of feeling, new habits of reaction, response, and so forth. And the specifics of that, we learn. So, when we are feeling, irritation, we recall, if we have the memory to recall, that it is taught in the spiritual traditions that the antidote to irritation is patience. And we try to employ and exercise patience as an antidote and as the beginning of a new habit when one encounters what one regards as irritating person. When one feels strong, greed, desire, I want these, we usually don't even put it like that. We say, I need a new pair of shoes. That's, the strong greed at work. Well, then you exercise, the antidote to that, which is satisfaction with what you have, contentment with what you have. So with every mental affliction, there is its opposite, and the learning, the remembering of what the antidote is to any given mental affliction, then provides you with the ammunition, with the tools that you need to deploy that opposite when you are responding to the arising of a mentally afflicted feeling or thought. Does that answer the question?
It sounds like basically kind of act as if and you will become is the antidote.
Yeah, I mean, you could say it like that. You could, say something like, fake it till you make it. These new healthy dharmic responses, ethical responses, have not become second nature. To a person that has to fake it, like all of us mostly do, we have to just say, well, I will act as if, I will think as if, I will try to feel as if I really felt this way. What I really do is I hate her guts. But what what I'd like to, you know, like my intention, my sankalpa is to try to be a better person. So I'll try to pretend that I love her, you know, or feel compassion towards her at least, or exercise patience in relation to her. So yeah, it is, I think, you know, it's artificial. It's artificial until it becomes natural. But that's, you know, that's what I was saying, that with the repeated practice, these kinds of practices, these kinds of, you know, new habits become second nature, so that you know, you really are feeling that those beneficial, dharmically, ethically, you know, laden kinds of feelings and thoughts and so forth. It's not just a fake it till you make it anymore, because you made it. But until then, you're faking it, mostly. That's the negative part of it. There's a positive part of it too, which is when, because of your exercise of mindfulness, of mere awareness, of, you know, just like recognition of what's going on in your mind-body complex, you see the arising of a positive thought or feeling, and you know, and then you say, well, that's good. I feel good when I feel, you know, love, when I feel compassion, when I feel a sense of belonging, of interdependent. I feel good when that happens, and I want to feel good in the future. So this is another way of, you know, of creating new karma for the future, is to rejoice in the actual, in the beneficial kinds of things that arise in our, you know, body mind complex, and reinforce those, you know, feelings for the future, thoughts and feelings for the future. Lauren, hi.
Hi, so I just wanted to introduce you to Jeremy, who just married Michelle Sangalay, whom you know.
Ah, congratulations. Hey. I met Jeremy, I think, last summer, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, but they just got married here last night. Yeah. So.
Oh, wow, congratulations. Yeah. Now the fun really begins.
Wow, is this mindfulness talk your honeymoon?
I wanted, before I forget, you know, we don't have to quit yet, but before I forget, I wanted to encourage you all to think about coming to next summer's Enlightened Experience retreat. This is a third annual. This is a retreat that's sponsored by Middle Way LA, and occurs on the central coast of California this year, 25th through the 29th of July. And we're calling, the theme this year is Soul Fire, which is pretty damn sexy, don't you think? So what we'll basically be, you know, organizing practices and teachings and so forth around is the idea of trying to live authentically, and both, you know, kind of in the sense of, you know, being true to yourself, to the, you know, sort of little self, to the individual self, but also to get in touch with our deepest and most real self, what the Buddhists call our Buddha nature. So we'll be looking at teachings from a text called the Uttara Tantra that tells us, it is the most, as far as I can tell, I mean, you know, don't know everything for sure, but it seems like the most comprehensive description of enlightenment in the Buddhist canon. So we'll be rating that text to, you know, to figure out, well, what is Buddhahood? What do they mean by Buddhahood? How would a Buddha act? So that, you know, so that we can, like, practice it, you know, we can practice taking the goal as a path. So it's a very exciting text, and, you know, there are lots of other sort of aspects to the retreat, and people who have been to the retreat can tell people who haven't been to the retreat, like, you know, what it's like. And I encourage you all to try to come. You have, I think, until the end of this month to get a early bird special on the pricing, and to get the best selections of rooms at a beautiful resort that we have the retreat at. So I just wanted to mention that. Yeah.
Come here.
And I see Marie, and I can't see the face of colleague Kaylee
Sarah.
and Sarah. But if you guys who are coming in at a distance have questions, you can I think figure out some way to ask them.
They might be able to chat anyway.
Anyway.
If there's someone who
Yeah. Yeah.
They kind of do themselves. In relation to what you were just talking about, using mindfulness to perhaps see stimulus producing unhelpful reactions within, and trying to act in a different way to create a new habit pattern. How would one try to navigate not reinforcing desire or aversion inside, saying, oh, I don't want to feel that, or does that make sense?
Desire for a person?
No. He's saying that when you're changing the patterns,
Yeah.
you're saying you're sort of desiring
Yeah.
or not desiring
Yeah.
certain behaviors. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Am I averse to my own afflictions that are arising?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aversion to his own afflictions, or desire for good pleasant experiences, aversions, or
Well,
his afflictions.
If I'm understanding your question right, you just stay there, because I might not be understanding your question right. You know, desire is a very important thing to look at and to investigate. What is it that we want? What is it that you really want, you know, in life? And you can say that about pretty much any individual arising of desire. You know, I want a new pair of shoes. Well, why? You know, why do you want a new pair of shoes? And then you go, well, because the, you know, new pair of shoes makes me happy. Having a new pair of shoes makes me happy. And it's like, well, why? Is that because, you know, there's some kind of happiness producing quality in shoes? So if I got shoes, then, you know, I'd get that happiness rush from my feet upwards or something. And, you know, so if you push the envelope on desire, what you come to inevitably, I'd say, you know, with every particular version of desire, we come to the realization that what we desire actually is the end of desire. What we desire is not wanting. I want to feel that I have enough. So behind every desire is, you know, the desire, capital T, capital D, which is the desire to end desire and be content and satisfied. And you know, so we go through life over and over and over again thinking that that's going to occur if we buy a new pair of shoes, or if we got a better job, or if we got a better boyfriend or girlfriend, that then the desire that I have would be fulfilled. But desire can't be fulfilled like that. You can't fulfill every single desire that arises in your mind. So, you know, the antidote to the constant repetitive, you know, cycle of wanting is to say, I have enough. I don't need that. I don't want that. I don't need that. So why should I want it? And understanding that that's what you want out of desire anyway, is the end of desire. So you just put an end to it. Say, this is good enough. Say Om, I have enough.
Enough.
Yeah. That's mantra. That's the mantra of contentment. And until we believe in that mantra, we'll always be subject to desire. And aversion is just the opposite of desire. You know, I don't want this. You know, it's just another form of discontentment, you know. If only I didn't have, you know, this lousy boss at my job, I'd be happy. And, you know, it doesn't take a brain scientist, a rocket scientist to figure out that you can't end desire by trying to fulfill all desires. And you can't end aversion by getting rid of all the negative things that you think are in your life. You know, it's got to be more at the root.
He's talking also about the
Just 1 minute.
mental affliction, like you were talking about judging your behavior and that you're negative. So then you're supposed to have aversion for your negative mental affliction.
Yeah.
So how, I think he's asking, like, how do you not have this desire and aversion when you're dealing with your own karma and mental affliction?
Cindy's asked a question on your behalf. I don't know if you could hear her, but anyway, we'll try it again and see if this is what you meant. Desire and aversion can also be used as tools, have to be used as tools. We desire to be a better person, you know. It's motivation, actually. We desire to try to live a more ethical life. We desire to, you know, change our habitual negative responses, emotional and mental. And similarly with aversion, I have an aversion to suffering. If we didn't have an aversion to suffering, why would we ever try to end it? See, I have an aversion to, you know, looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, well, I shouldn't have said that to that person, or, you know, I shouldn't feel this way towards, you know, this event or whatever, right? So desire and aversion function, you know, as positively, you know, within a spiritual context, but they too have to eventually come to an end. Eventually, you know, the last desire to go is the desire for the end of desire. The last aversion to go is the aversion we have towards suffering. But you know, on the way towards that, you know, kind of finality, they can be very, very useful, desire and aversion. Is that what you meant, more or less?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. Finally, after 20 minutes of like rambling around, finally answered the question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I heard this word stress reduction and anxiety, and I have a question actually. I have a different experience, and I know a lot of people who experience the same, especially with the long meditation retreats, is that mindfulness can actually cause stress and anxiety. And that's what I have personally, and I have a lot of aversion to this, and I don't necessarily know how to. I mean, the only best way is to be non-judgmental to this, but here we're talking about having this right component, this like sum. And I don't know how to react to this right. So can you elaborate on this?
Well, I caught some of your question, especially that mindfulness can cause stress. I love that. That's a very, very good point. You know, we can screw up pretty much everything, you know, like we managed to screw up pretty much everything. And it's no different with the spiritual life. The spiritual life can be very stressful, and it can be, you know, productive of all kinds of mental afflictions, of jealousy about, you know, people you think are doing better than you are, or pride when you think that you're like so awesome of a practitioner and so on. You know, mental afflictions can infect and do infect pretty much everything. I would say that, you know, if you're experiencing stress through, you know, with the practice of mere awareness, if mere awareness is bringing you stress, well, then you have to figure, well, what is it about what I'm being aware of that's stressful? And so, you know, well, I'm being aware of my own like negative mental tendencies and so forth. And to an extent, well, that's good that you're stressed about them. That's the beginning of wanting to change them. But if you don't have the tools, you know, if you haven't located awareness or mindfulness within a larger spiritual context, then you're just left with the negative experience without any kind of like understanding of how to change it, right? That's kind of what I was indicating is the problem of a purely secularized understanding of mindfulness, where you just take the awareness out of its total context and leave it, non-judgmentally. And so, I guess I'd try to encourage you to think about, if stress is arising when you're practicing mindfulness, whether that isn't a kind of a good trigger for doing something to change what it is that you're being aware of, so that you're not going to be aware of that, so much in the future. You see what I mean? New habit forming. But, it's without all the sort of components, without the whole sequence that I was trying to lay out in which mindfulness functions, that you're left kind of unempowered, aren't you? To just observe what's going on and, like try not to get too carried away with it. I mean, it's just kind of like, it's a little bit of just being a victim of, the ever-changing, patterns of your mind and body, and your physical and mental, apparatus. And instead of, intervening and trying to take a little bit more control over it, at least for the future, if not in the immediate present.
You basically imply that there is a little bit of analytical thinking and involved. So I should analyze why this is happening and try to resolve this somehow.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, again, I would just say, like, focus on, if you are feeling stress while practicing mere awareness, while practicing mindfulness of what's going on physically, what's going on with your feelings, what's going on with your state of mind, what's going on with your thoughts, if you start to feel, if your reaction to that awareness is stress, then the analysis, as you say, is, well, why? What is it about what I'm feeling, thinking, experiencing that elicits stress in me? And then I think you're kind of on the track. You're on the track of like identifying which of the things that you are observing are positive and which are negative, and which are in need of change and which are in need of celebration and rejoicing and reinforcement. So then you're evaluating, you're making the judgments, you're making the evaluation on what it is that you're experiencing. So stress, it seems, is just one, is a potentially a positive indicator for, for what it is that we need to change in our own minds.
All right, thank you.
Can I just ask something about this? No, just on what you were saying, because you were talking about that you're experiencing this particularly in retreat.
Yeah, because they practice more.
So
yeah.
I'm wondering if some of this might have to do with handling what we call lung in a retreat.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I just kind of wanted to, if it's a retreat phenomenon, then there's this other element where if you double down on your efforts, it gets worse. So
Yeah, that's right. And that's kind of a long story. And Lauren, maybe you can to talk to the gentleman a little bit more after the class about what lung really means and the the kind of antidotes to it. But yeah, in terms of mere awareness or mindfulness, it seems to me that if we're going to reintroduce judgment the very thing that secularized mindfulness has tried to take out of the practice, then, there's going to be inevitable kinds of discomfort. You are looking at your own mind and realizing how polluted it is. And that's not very comfortable. And to be aware of that is, part of what awareness is, to be aware of the response that you have towards a particular feeling or thought that's arising, but also to be aware, to remember, smriti means memory, to remember that you have tools. If you've been, spiritually trained, you have tools to deal with that kind of discomfort, and to analyze it, to try and figure it out, and very, very importantly, just try to figure out where it came from, to try and figure out who's experiencing it, and very, very importantly and practically, to try to figure out, well, what's going to change it? If not in the immediate present, in the future, how can I establish new habits of thoughts and feelings and so forth that will come to fruition in the future, so that I won't experience this one over and over and over again? You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Okay, everyone done? Anyone? No more questions? Marie, you got a question?
More questions?
No?
Sorry. So this goes along with sort of what you were saying, but I was wondering about the difference between the secular and spiritual. Just because when you were speaking about the spiritual, you mentioned this concept of gaining credit and karma. But then when I was thinking about that having to do with the secular ego, don't you think that you could use both of those sort of to have the same result in the long run? Like, if you use your credit to influence yourself and other people in your community, couldn't you also use enhancing yourself using your ego in that same manner?
You mean from a secular point of view?
Yeah, so what I was wondering is that can't you apply some of those more spiritual mindsets to a secular way of mindfulness?
Well, it kind of depends what we mean by secular, after all, doesn't it? I would make a very sharp distinction between spiritual and sectarian, for example. Sectarian means that you've bought into one or another of the many choices that we have nowadays, the various orthodoxies, and you train yourself in that, and you buy into their worldview and all of that. A spiritual way of life, I think, can be much more non-sectarian and universal. I mean, one of the things that I did appreciate about John Kabat-Zinn's approach is that he wants to universalize mindfulness, which means, taking it out of the sectarian Buddhist context, which I think is fine. But if you take it then further out of any spiritual context, then I think there are obvious limitations and so forth. So, like I said, it sort of depends on what we mean by secular, and maybe another way of trying to discern what the difference is between secular and spiritual is, well, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of this tool, of this discipline? And it seems to me that the purely secularized version of it has only as its purpose a temporary alleviation of stress and the combating of the tendency towards multitasking, which is fine. Like as far as that goes, that's really good. And lots of people can benefit from that, or we can all benefit from that. But the spiritual, the mindfulness within the spiritual context has a much deeper and larger purpose than just mere stress relief and let alone, attention on one's profession or work. In the yoga tradition, for those of you who know the Eightfold path of yoga, the 8 angas of yoga, Mindfulness does appear there, not under the usual term of sati or smriti, but under the term dharana. So the last three angas of the yoga tradition are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Dharana means mere awareness. Dharana means you just put your mind on something. And the commentaries always say, and it doesn't matter for how long, just even momentarily, you're aware of what's going on. You know, you're aware of an object. Dhyana, the next anga, the next step, is holding your mind on that. You know, that's meditation, is being able to hold in a one-pointed way your mind on a particular chosen object. And then samadhi is it seems to me, and this is somewhat controversial, but it's my opinion, samadhi is the release of that kind of discipline and the full integration of oneself into the world around one. And that's freedom. So samadhi is not actually a practice, it's a goal. But you see what I mean? Dharana comes into play in a lot of different contexts, spiritual contexts. But, you know, here in the yoga tradition, dharana or mindfulness is in the service of the development of meditation skills. And so, you know, that's something I think that also is lost when one just practices mere awareness without it being in the service of something higher or something more important.
I guess my question is just how you had touched upon karma having to do with the mindfulness. So do you think there's a way in terms of secular mindfulness that you could view it without that type of karma, you know, like
well, you don't have to believe in karma, but karma believes in you. I mean, no, I mean, there's no. No, look, I mean, I don't think it's. I have personally known very, very few people who actually believe that there is no such thing as what we call karma. That their actions have absolutely no impact on the world around them. Very, very few people. And I don't believe you can survive 5 minutes in the world with that kind of mindset. We all have some faith, belief, and experience that what we do, at least, and what we say also, and even what we think, has an impact, has some kind of impact on ourselves, on other people, and on the world around us. So you don't have to, you know, kind of use secular and spiritual kind of dichotomies to talk about causality and responsibility for one's actions. If you don't have any sort of belief that what one does matters, then it's almost a theoretical mindset, because I just don't believe you could even survive 5 minutes without some version of that. Complete nihilism, that nothing matters, nothing exists, nothing, you know, nothing that I do, say, or think will have any impact whatsoever. I just don't believe that that's a possible way of living, actually.
I think she's asking.
Cindy's rephrasing your question again.
I think she's asking in a secular presentation of mindfulness, instead of using the word karma, in what way could you present it without it being spiritual? Like the Dalai Lama does.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, so that's like, because obviously, if you're a good person, people are going to respond to you in a better way. So
yes,
but instead of it being how you had mentioned the phrase building credit, if there's a different way, if you can attribute, because I think that the way that I'm thinking about it is that I can see how that could be attributed to the secular mindfulness, you know, without using karma or building credit, because I think that that's still an idea that a lot of people could use without all of the spiritual tenets.
Yeah, okay. I mean, maybe it's just a matter of terminology. If you don't like the word karma, that's fine.
They use secular ethics.
Use secular ethics, or, I'm just personally, and maybe I'm just being stubborn about this. Personally, I just don't think, I don't understand how life could go on without some form of understanding that what one does has an impact. And you can call that karma, or you can call that, secular ethics, or you can call that causality, you can call it any kind of thing. So then the next question is, well, what kind of an impact do I want to be making? What kind of an impact on myself, first and foremost? What kind of imprints, memories do I want to be creating for myself? And then you introduce an ethical guideline. And I don't think there's anything inherently spiritual about saying, try not to hurt other people, try not to lie, try not to take what doesn't belong to you, try not to, sleep with people you shouldn't sleep with, try not to be greedy all the time. These are, in the Buddhist tradition, sometimes they make a distinction between that kind of ethics and what they call vowed morality, where you take a vow to try to live according to, a bodhisattva's way of life or something like that. The other kind, don't harm, don't steal, don't lie, et cetera, is sometimes called natural ethics. It's just, it's a natural way that we should be living in relation to one another. It has nothing to do with any kind of, sectarian worldview or theology or, belief systems or something like that. It's just the natural way that we should be interacting with one another.
Yeah, well, that's the answer, sort of. The fact that you said that one of those isn't only attributable to one thing is what I was saying. So that
yeah. I mean, just a lot of times we get caught up in, in language games, and if karma strikes you as being problematic, and I can understand why. It's kind of laden, it comes with a lot of baggage, right? Potentially. Well, just think about it as memory. I mean, I think, well, what kind of memories do you want to have? Beginning with, like, how do you want to wake up tomorrow, in relation to what you did today, right? And so that I think, that I think is a very, very useful guideline for living. How do I want to look at myself? And when I'm looking at myself, I'm looking at, my memories of what I think I have said, done, and said in the past, both recent and lifetime.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. All right, everyone getting tired?
Is there time for one more?
Yeah.
So I know we don't have time to go into this in depth. I was just wondering if you could point to any resources on how to purify memory.
How to purify memory?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's part and parcel of a spiritual training to practice things like forgiveness and acceptance and so forth, and that begins at home. So forgiveness, we could have done whole retreats on the concept of forgiveness, but and it's I have a long section of it in my Spiritual Renegade book, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean excusing. It doesn't mean that, you didn't do it. You didn't, do the thing that you're having negative memories about. And so it doesn't mean that, but it means that just as we forgive others for the things they've done against us, the negativity that they have, perpetuated against us, we forgive ourselves. And we all make mistakes. And so it seems to me that one of the obviously most important and powerful ways of purifying memory is the practice of forgiveness and acceptance. So acceptance also means that, you know, as we look back on our lives, we see things that we, kind of regret. We see things that we wish we hadn't had done. We see mistakes that we've made. We see, positive things also. But as we look back on our lives, we have to realize that every one of those events that we are remembering has made us who we are today. And to have that kind of acceptance of your past and as part of the acceptance of the present, which doesn't mean that there isn't plenty of room for change. But the spiritual life and the power of the spiritual life requires a certain kind of self-affirmation, seems to me. A person who's having huge problems with depression or self-esteem or something like that is really at a disadvantage when it comes to trying to work the machinery of a spiritual life, primarily because the thought patterns of a person who is truly affected by low self-esteem, the thought patterns all revolve around that self. It is a very self-centered way of being in the world to have low self-esteem, which kind of sounds counterintuitive. But I think if you work it out, and especially if you've experienced it, like, I was hospitalized for depression. So I feel I can talk about it with some experience, if not authority. And I just remember, the only thing I could think about, when I was well and truly clinically depressed was myself and how bad I felt. And that's not a spiritual mindset. That's the opposite of a spiritual mindset, thinking about yourself all the time. So how did I get off on that? Oh, that was about, that's one kind of an approach to purifying memory, is to not to forget, I think, but to forgive yourself and to accept that even that negative thing that I really regret, and by the way, that I will try not to do again. Okay, that's part of it too. Try my damnedest not to do it again. That was an instrumental component into making me the person I am today, and for better and for worse, and to use it as a opportunity to have that kind of basic self-acceptance of yourself, flaws and all, joined with the intention and ambition to try to become a better person in the future by not replicating the same mistakes that I've made in the past.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay, Dima.
You mentioned, from what I understood, that the Mahayana path begins as if after the perfection of mindfulness, which I can see the sense in that. However, the Eightfold path does not seem to contain anything around compassion. So which also makes sense, because my understanding is it was expounded to monks living in the forest. So, but for those of us living in a complex social environment, it seems to me anyway that compassion and this kind of Mahayana understanding, Mahayana training of relating to others can make is like the right way to relate to people. So if we delay that until mindfulness is perfected, I'm concerned that would make it for a very unskillful way of relating to others while we're perfecting our self-obsessed mindfulness.
Well, I don't know enough about the Theravada tradition to say, but I would strongly suspect that you wouldn't have to look too far if you studied Theravada to find compassion in the Theravada tradition as well, number one. So let's not get involved in that old sectarian dispute about who's better, Mahayana or Theravada. They're both, very beautiful paths and so forth. But I was trying to say with what you call the perfection of mindfulness, I don't know if the perfection of mindfulness means you don't have to be mindful anymore. So I guess, I guess I would say that is a goal. Just as I think the perfection of ethics means that you don't have to be thinking all the time about what's the right thing to do. You just do it. You've learned how to live in a kind of a spontaneously ethical life because of years and years and years of training and of meditation and of new habit forming and so forth. Compassion as a spiritual skill in its pure form, I think, can only occur with the release of the self, the end of ego, or as I like to sometimes think of it, the radical expansion of self, so that it's all inclusive of all living beings, and but that also, entails the end of the grasping to the individual self. But that's a pure form, and until we get there, just like with any other virtue in the spiritual life, you practice whatever version of it you can, and all versions of all spiritual practices, compassion, mindfulness, yoga, meditation, ethics, all versions of spiritual practice are infected by ego until they're not. You know what I mean? So it's it's always about some version of, well, what's in it for me, and so we have to recognize that and recognize that until we eradicate the attachment to ego altogether, we have to deal with some relative forms of these virtues, like a relative compassion. And we begin by, feeling compassion means feeling together, right? Compassion, feeling as if it were happening to you. And that means it's kind of like a broadening of the identification of who you think you are to include others. And we begin by practicing that, with our loved ones at home, with our, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, husband, wives, boyfriend, girlfriend, and with our close friends, where, we have a kind of, there's already a sensibility that these are people that are in some sense or another, also myself. They're also part of who I regard as me. And then the spiritual practice is to try to get to a point where that re-identification of self has expanded to include all living beings. But that it seems to me is entirely dependent on the realization of some form of no self, some form of the fact that the self is just an illusion anyway, and can be redefined in this all expansive way. So I'm kind of personally of the opinion these days that true compassion and wisdom, are kind of the same thing. True compassion and ultimate wisdom about the no self nature of the individual and the essencelessness of the world around us, and the fact of constant change and flux. All that is the condition of possibility for true compassion.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, this was a pleasure. I thank you for coming and for listening and for contributing to the conversation and all of that. And, like I said before, I know these kinds of virtual things are not ideal, but for me, at least, they're better than nothing. And hopefully you feel the same way, at least a little bit. And once again, just to put the plug in for the retreat in July where we could potentially all meet in person, and that would be lovely. So if you're interested in finding out more about that retreat, there's the website enlightenedexperience.org, enlightenedexperience.org. And there are people in the room there, Dima and Lauren and others who can inform you more about that retreat too. So hopefully I'll see some of you there next year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Stop video.
That was great. Yeah. That was great how this worked out with the
Yeah, it worked out really well.